Hello, welcome. It's kind of rainy here in Ithaca, but we're here together to share some thoughts and insights about Chinese culture at this year's Shi Distinguished Lecture. I'm Andrea Bachner, the director of the East Asia program here at Cornell, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Distinguished Shi Lecture, which will be delivered by our colleague Meir Shahar. As you might know, the Hushu Distinguished Lecture is held annually at Cornell to celebrate the legacy of Hushu, one of the foremost Chinese intellectuals of his time, a writer, statesman, translator, and thinker. Hushu is also one of Cornell's most famous international alums, who graduated from Cornell in 1914. Last year, when I had the privilege of offering opening remarks for that year's Hushu lecture, I underlined the adventure of cultural and intellectual endeavors that Hushu's life and work embody, endeavors that are exemplars of Cornell's key values. I pointed to his role of mediator between different cultures, to the interdisciplinary scope of his work, and to his synergistic attention to the cultural past and the political present. All of this is still important, of course, but this year has been unlike any other year, at least in my memory. This year, as we face a global pandemic, we're both more isolated as individuals in our social distance and quarantine pods, and more connected with the rest of the planet than ever before. While the challenges of COVID-19 are shared by all humanity, they are also making violent structures of difference more apparent, such as the rampant xenophobia and anti-Asian sentiments that we're witnessing, and the ever starker racial, social, and economic divides that have sparked global resistance movements. This context makes Hushu lessons more vital than ever today, as his work and life teach us how to create connections across cultures, across disciplines, across traditions. And it is these connections that shape us and make us better as individuals, as social and human beings, rather than isolationism, the violent disconnection from and suppression of anything we deem different. Last year, we came together here in Ithaca and shared knowledge and ideas, as well as food and drink. This year, it is the online mediascape of the Zoom webinar that brings us together. But even as we might miss some of the contact and presence that an in person event provides, there's also a lot to be grateful for in this new format, especially the opportunity for bringing people together in thought and dialogue from many locations. For one, today's lecture by Professor Shahar connects us across continents. From the US, where my East Asia program colleagues TJ Hendricks and Soo-Young Sun host this event, to Israel, from where Meir Shahar shares his research, to China, the subject of this research. And this does not yet describe all of you who are joining us here today for this event. It is up to all of us to structure and live this as a shared space, a coming together of minds and ideas. And I find it especially auspicious that the topic of Professor Shahar's talk, namely Chinese animal gods, resonates particularly well with Hu Shi's Cornelian story. After all, Hu Shi came to Cornell to study agriculture, only then to switch to and graduate in literature and philosophy. But let me stop here with thanks to all of you for making this event possible, for being here. My colleague, Professor Teacher Hinrichs, will introduce today's speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And thank you to the East Asia program for their sponsorship. I'd also like to make a special shout out to Amala Lane, who has handled so much of the support and infrastructure of this event. Also to Josh Young and Jennifer Fields at the East Asia program, and not least to my co-organizer, Professor Soo-Young Sung from Asian Studies. And I would like to thank Meir Shahar for staying up quite late in Israel to join us today. Professor Shahar is the Scholl and Eisenberg Chair for East Asian Affairs at Tel Aviv University. And I have long been a fan of Professor Shahar's work. I have assigned it in numerous courses over the years. It is interdisciplinary in the best way, not to denigrate different forms of interdisciplinarity, but Professor Shahar has long worked at the intersections of what had been and in some ways persist in being domains that can be treated separately in American academic, in American academic departments and disciplines. But these domains are not separate, are integral in the daily lives and lived experiences of the vast majority of people in China historically and today. And so these are powerful interventions for the history and anthropology, two of these separate disciplines that he intervenes in, of China, for religious studies and literary studies. And within literary studies, Professor Shahar began to take seriously popular novels as a genre that is integral to the lived religious life of people in China, to martial arts and religion, one of the first to bring studies of martial arts from the margins of academic study to the mainstream. And in his most recent work, which puts animals front and center. So he has also helped to break down older views of, for example, of Chinese religion as dominated by the three silos of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, with popular religion as this kind of leftover category. And studies of religious practice that treated the imperial bureaucratic structure of the pantheon and of human divine relations as structured by imperial in an imperial bureaucratic way. His very first co-edited volume, Unruly Gods, brought attention to a wide range of deities that did not fit those patterns. And so he's given us a much richer and more diverse understanding of Chinese religious practice, both historical and contemporary. And so thus, while he's brought attention to religious practices, divinities, and texts that, while marginal to some hegemonic state-centered traditions, have been, and again, are central in the daily lives of most people. His monographs include Crazy G, Chinese Religion and Popular Literature, Oedipal God, the Chinese Nujia and his Indian Origins, and Shaolin Monastery, History, Religion, and the Chinese Martial Arts. And that volume has been translated into multiple languages. His first co-edited volume, Unruly Gods, thank you to the publisher. I was able to assign multiple years at a cost affordable to undergraduates. India in the Chinese Imagination, Myth, Religion, and Thought, another co-edited volume, Chinese and Tibetan Esoteric Buddhism, and most recently, Animals and Human Society in Asia, which brings us to today's talk on Chinese animal gods. And so without further ado, Professor Shahar.
Thank you so much. You are so kind. Okay, so it's a great honor and a great pleasure to give the Kosher lecture. It's a real honor. My only regret is that I can't visit you in the flesh, because I hear that Cornell is so gorgeous. And there are so many friends there. Stephen Sangren, for example, who helped me in my early years as a young scholar. that I would love to meet, but it's impossible now. So, but thank you so much. I would like to begin by reminding us of something that you all know, namely that our ancestors depended upon draft animals for a living. They depended upon beasts of burden to make a living. And I'm not talking about our remote ancestors of thousands of years ago. I'm talking about of our relatively recent ancestors of, say, 100 years ago. Think, for example, about Shih, which Andrea just mentioned, Shih, in whose honor we gather today. When Shih arrived to Cornell to study agriculture, as Andrea mentioned, all agricultural implements, ploughs and harrows and whatnot, in the United States and all over the world, were harnessed to animals. So here, yes, he's, I guess, an American farmer, perhaps near Ithaca, I don't know. And as you can see, yes, the plough is harnessed to animals. And what is true of agriculture is certainly true also of transportation. Inner city transportation all over the world into the 1920s was powered by animals. Think, for example, about, this is long after the train was invented and used for long distance travel. Inner city travel was still powered by animals. So for those of you who do study literature, think, for example, of Tolstoy's beloved heroine, tragic heroine, Anna Karenina. Anna Karenina travels by train from Moscow to St. Petersburg. And in St. Petersburg, at the train station, her husband awaits her in a horse-drawn sledge. Yes. Or think of Sherlock Holmes rushing to Paddington Station to catch the train. He rushes by a horse-drawn carriage. So here's, for example, New York, around the time that Shih arrived to your gorgeous campus, you know, all traffic is powered by animals, buses and trams, even fire engines, yes? If you see Charlie Chaplin movies, there are still horses, yes? So it's all horses into the 1920s. Here is for you the Champs-Élysées in Paris. And rather than fancy cars, this is around the year 1900, these are still, yes, horse-drawn carriages. And the question is, let us try to imagine the relations between our ancestors who relied on these beasts of burden, on these animals, the relations they had with these animals. It's a kind of a relation that we don't have anymore. Consider, for example, this Chinese peasant who is leading his buffalo across the rice paddies. What kind of a relation do they have? The animal and the human owner and his human master, yes? So on the one hand, this is exploitation. A human being is exploiting another animal species. Humans are exploiting other animals. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, the peasant depends upon his buffalo. There is mutual dependence between them. The peasant stands nothing to gain by mistreating the animal because he depends upon the animal. It is in his interest, in the peasant's interest, that the buffalo be well fed, be strong, be healthy. And this is true, of course, of American farmers and French farmers and whoever, you know, all over the world. It is the interest of the farmer that his animal is well treated, well fed. In China, even more so, because Chinese peasants, for example, in South China, where they relied upon buffaloes, Chinese peasants owned no more than one animal, usually per family. One animal. The buffalo was extremely expensive, and a family could not afford to own more than one. Sometimes they couldn't even afford one. We know of families that rented, of farmers that rented or shared beasts of burden. But it's a very expensive animal. They owned only one, and it's a very powerful animal. You don't need two to pull the plow. One is enough. So the Chinese peasant has only one animal at his disposal. And this animal, by the way, can live for many years. The buffalo can work over 20 years, sometimes 30 years. So just imagine, day in, day out, the peasant goes out to the fields with the same animal. They work together, they labor together for over 20 years sometimes. So the peasant, it is in his interest to treat well the animal, that the animal stays healthy. But beyond the utilitarian motive, I think it is reasonable to assume, to imagine that the peasant loves the animal, that there is a camaraderie between them. After all, the peasant spends with the animal almost as much time, perhaps more, than he spends with his family, with his children, with his wife. Yeah. So, because Chinese peasants depended upon animals for a living, and because they probably really cared for the animals, they really loved the animals, they prayed for the health of their beasts of burden. And here I'm arriving at the topic of my presentation today. There were gods in China, gods whose responsibility it was to protect animals. And people prayed to these gods to protect their beasts of burden. And the two principal gods, the two most widely worshipped gods were, you see them here in this image, were the horse king, here on the right, Ma Wang, the horse king, who protected equine beasts of burden, that is horses, donkeys, and mules. And the other god, his bovine counterpart, is the ox king, who protected oxen in North China and buffaloes in South China. Oxen and buffaloes. By the way, if you permit me to digress for a second, Niu, this Chinese word Niu, yes, in the name of this god, you see my mouse here, Niu Wang, yes, ox, this word Niu, which I translate as ox. This word can also be translated as buffalo. The word Niu means both buffalo and ox. So I imagine that in South China, when people said Niu Wang, what they had in mind was a buffalo king, protecting the buffalo. In North China, where they use oxen, when people said Niu Wang, what they had in mind was an ox king. But anyway, these are the two gods that, if you like, are the topic of my presentation today. Now, this beautiful image itself, this colorful print, it's a folk print, is not only decorative, it has in fact a ritual function. We know for a fact that such images were pasted in animal sheds, in stables, cow sheds, to protect their inmates. So this is an icon, this is a religious icon that was put in animal sheds to protect the animals. Just as similar icons, similar paper prints of the gods with images of human protecting deities were placed inside the home to protect the human members of the family. So yeah, it's the same thing. You have gods whose images are placed inside the house to protect the human members of the family, and gods or images such as this one, which are placed in stables or animal sheds to protect the animals. So the picture it's called a New Year print, Nianhua. It has a ritual function. Now, one additional comment, a tiny comment, perhaps related to my background, my Jewish background. So that's why I'm making it. This is a folk print, yes. So it's beautiful, it's expressive, it's very colorful, but it's rather crude. So crude that the horse here on the right, on the bottom right, that is protected by the horse king, and the ox, bottom left, protected by the ox king, are hardly distinguishable. I mean, they are distinguishable, but they are rather similar. They're not drawn very meticulously. But notice the care that the artist took, the folk artist took, to differentiate them between them, the ox and the horse, he differentiates between them by way of the hoofs. You see that the ox has split hoofs, which is a biological fact. Oxen and buffaloes are split-hoofed ungulates, it's true, whereas the horse is an odd-toed ungulate and the hoof is unsplit. So this is how they distinguish between them. Now, why is this interesting? Because when I was doing field work in Chinese villages in Shanxi province, and I asked an old villager, tell me, what is the difference between the horse king and the ox king? So he said, look at the hoofs of the animal. If the hoofs are split, it is protected by the ox king. If the hoofs aren't split, it is protected by the horse king. So my fieldwork corroborates this image, or the image corroborates my fieldwork. And as to my Jewish heritage, Jewish kosher laws are based upon, hinge upon the animal, the hoofs of the animals. In Jewish kosher laws, animals that have split hoofs are kosher, such as cows, whereas animals which hoofs aren't split are non-kosher, such as the horse. The horse is not kosher. So I just find it curious that the ancient Hebrews, 3,000 years ago, and Chinese peasants similarly differentiate animals by their hoofs. Anyway, that's a side point digression. But these are the gods that are my topic. Now, as you can see here, they are often worshipped together. The horse king and the ox king are worshipped together. And if you have such an image at home of both of them together, you are sure that all your animals are protected. In between them, they protect all the animals, all your draft animals. But sometimes they are worshipped independently of each other. There are many temples just for the horse king and many temples just for the ox king. And when they are worshipped independently, when we are talking about the individual horse king cult, in comparison to the individual ox king cult or buffalo king cult, there are differences. There are differences between these gods. And the first difference concerns geographic distribution. How so? And here you can see the relation between religion and ecology, or religion and animal husbandry. The prevalent draft animals of North China, in North China, were equines, horses, mules, and especially donkeys. Here, look at this picture here. On the right, you see a donkey. I've been very much interested in donkeys. I wrote an essay about the donkey in Chinese history, in late period Chinese history. The donkey is a remarkable animal. It's incredibly sturdy and it can survive in arid areas. So here in Israel, there are donkeys, but also in China, the donkey was the most common draft animal in the Yellow River plains, which are very arid and dry. It's very hard to raise horses there because there isn't enough fodder for them. So in North China, they rely upon equines, especially donkeys. And this means that in North China, they worship the horse king. In North China, there are many, or there were many, many temples for the horse king. By contrast, in South China, you don't find many equines as beasts of burden. The most important draft animal in South China is the buffalo, yes, and therefore in South China, they worship the ox king. So this is the basic geographic divide. North China, there were temples for the horse king. South China, temples for the ox king, which, as I said, might also be rendered in English as buffalo king. I should say I just used the past tense where there were temples. Nowadays, these gods, I'm just saying, just noting, nowadays, these gods are largely forgotten, the horse king and the ox king. And the reason is because people don't rely upon draft animal anymore, or much less. So many people just forget. These are largely forgotten gods. Not completely, but largely forgotten. Okay, so this is the first difference between the two gods. South China, as I said, I'm repeating myself, ox king. North China, it's the horse king. The other difference concerns state patronage. What do I mean by that? The ox or the buffalo is used or was used just by peasants. So we are talking rural cult. Basically, these were only peasants who worshipped the ox king or the buffalo king, because government officials didn't rely upon these animals. By contrast, horses, equines, were tremendously important for the imperial government. They were used on all levels of the administration, from the imperial palace in Beijing. There used to be a horse king temple inside the Forbidden City in Beijing, all the way to the postal service. Yes, every courier station in late imperial China had an icon of the horse king, because the postal service was operated by horses. And of course, the military, the Chinese army, the elite units of the Chinese army were mounted. So the horse king was a military god. He was worshipped beginning in the Ming period by the cavalry, by soldiers. This beautiful painting, for those of you interested in, those of you doing Chinese art know it's by Castiglione, yes, the Italian Jesuit painter at the court of the Chinese emperor. And beginning in the Ming period, every Chinese military base featured a shrine for the horse king, beginning in the Ming period and all the way to the early 20th century. So here you have I'm sure many of you visited this place. This is the Zhuyongguan, the large fortress northwest of Beijing. And in this large fortress, there is, to this day, you can visit it, there is a horse king temple that protected the cavalry, the Manchu cavalry, first the Ming cavalry and then the Manchu cavalry. And let me show you how it looks. This is the horse king as the protector of the cavalry. This is an image from the Zhuyongguan in northwest of Beijing. This should be Qing period. Yes, he looks really ferocious as a military god protecting the cavalry. Now, one additional comment, and then I will pause. I hope not too quickly. I will pause for some questions in a minute. And my comment concerns the image of the god. Now look at this creature, this god. It's really a striking image, yes. First of all, the god has multiple arms. He has two upper arms, wielding two swords that are crossed over the head, and two front arms also holding arrows and other weaponry. Usually, this god sports either 4 or 6 arms. Then, of course, there is this small horse on top of the human face, and note the third eye in the middle of the forehead. So it's a multi-limbed, multi-eyed god. And I imagine that you can already figure where I'm heading. When you see a Chinese god that is multi-armed and multi-eyed, you know that it came to China from where? From India. Because Indian gods are multi-armed and multi-eyed. So this is, by the way, another image of the horse king, and this is our image from India. This is Shiva. I'm sure you're all familiar. Shiva, who is both charming and ferocious, frightening, and you see the third eye in the middle of the forehead. Yes. So our god, the horse king, and I know this, I mean, I've written about this, there's no question about it. The horse king originated, his image originated in India. His immediate ancestor is this god. This is the horse-headed Avalokiteshvara. You all know who Avalokiteshvara is. It's the Bodhisattva Guanyin. Believe it or not, well, there is also a tantric image of Avalokiteshvara, which is known as the horse-headed Avalokiteshvara. You see the small horse on top of the human figure, just as we saw with the horse king. the flames rising, yes, the third eye, the middle of the head. Here it's also multi-headed, and the multiple arms. So the horse king is a Chinese god, and a Chinese god that has a Chinese function to protect Chinese horses. But his god was fashioned after an Indian prototype. I hope this is not too early. I don't know if you have any questions so far. I can skip but should I pause for a minute? I was thinking of pausing here if you have any questions so far, before speaking about the ox king. Should I go on, or what do you say? Or should I pause now?
Right now, I am not seeing any questions. Oh, here's one.
Mm-hmm.
So RL says, I was curious, and RL, I'm not sure who you are. I was curious about what you said about these gods being somewhat forgotten. To what extent was this forgetting sponsored by the state and not sort of a natural process?
So the question is, of course, an excellent question. What you are suggesting here, you say sponsored by the state. What you are hinting at is, of course, the communist state repression of religion, which, of course, the horse king suffered from, and the ox king, like all other Chinese gods. So yes, it's a sad story, but I don't know how many of you travel through northern Chinese villages that housed in the past dozens of temples, and none survives. So, yes, there is destruction by the state, but in the case of these gods, forgotten is also a natural process. It's also a natural process. Simply because people don't need them anymore. So, no draft animals, so the gods that protected them are forgotten gradually. So many people that I speak to in China, and I tell them I'm researching the Mawang, so they don't know who Mawang is. Some know, but some don't.
So so we also have not a question, but a comment. And that is from Sue George, that as a child, he saw farmers in his hometown singing to the buffalo to thank and relax them.
Yes, and this is, I think you are almost guessing where I'm heading. I might, if I succeed technically, I might put on a small recording of a village ritual master singing. It's more than a song, it's a prayer for the health of the buffalo. I hope we'll be able to listen to this in a few minutes. Yeah. Should I go on, or I don't know?
I do not see any more. If anybody has more, we can save them for the end.
Okay. So I'm going to turn now to the ox king, only the ox king, which might be rendered as buffalo king. What is interesting about the ox king, and in this he differs also from the horse king, is that we have a large body of scriptures, religious scriptures, dedicated to the ox king, such as this one here. It's titled 佛说牛王妙经, that is the scripture, the miraculous scripture or efficacious scriptures of the ox king spoken by the Buddha. Here is a scripture. And these scriptures, I collected several dozens. These scriptures were intended for the prevention and the healing of bovine disease. So if I have a buffalo, and the buffalo falls ill, I can invite a ritual master, a village ritual master, and the ritual master will recite the scripture to heal the animal. More commonly, however, I think these scriptures were recited as preventive measure, prophylactic medicine, meaning that once or twice every year, often on the occasion of the ox king's birthday, people will gather, and the ritual master will recite a scripture to guarantee that all the animals in the village stay healthy. So these are scriptures for read. And by the way, these scriptures are very long. The rituals are really long. I mean, it could last several hours to recite such a scripture, several hours, or even days. Now, where do I find these scriptures? Here I'm sharing you my adventures as a researcher. These scriptures are not to be found in any library in the world. Librarians around the world don't have them. They never made it into libraries. However, surprisingly, you can buy them online. What is happening is this. Village ritual masters are gradually disappearing, many of them. They don't use their scriptures anymore, whatever scriptures they had. The scriptures find their way to second-hand bookstores, and second-hand book dealers put these scriptures online for sale. So you can buy them. So if I enter a website such as, I'm sure many of you from China know it, the Confucius Jiu Shu Wang, it's like Amazon, but for used bookstore, and I type in Niu Wang, Ox King, I find many scriptures, Qing dynasty scriptures dedicated to the Ox King. And I find it really astonishing that I can buy online scriptures that were written, copied by humble village clerics, village ritual masters 100 years ago or 200 years ago or more. I should mention right here that I have a good friend in China, Professor Ho Chong. He introduced me to this literature. Yes, so I bought and he gave me many of these scriptures. And when we read these scriptures, here I'm writing, if you want, I'm disclosing the main point of my talk. When we read these scriptures, we discover a remarkable theology in them, namely that these scriptures articulate the idea that the animal itself, the ox itself, or the buffalo itself, is a god. If you want, this is a remarkable expression of gratitude, of human gratitude to another animal. What the scriptures say is that the ox king, or buffalo king, which they identify as a bodhisattva, is a Buddhist bodhisattva, merciful deity, chose willingly, volunteered to descend from heaven and serve the peasants as their beast of burden, to help them make a living. So here let us read one passage. At that time, the Bodhisattva of great strength, Da Li Musa, emerged from his seat. Pressing his palms in reverence, he addressed the Buddha saying, so here we have this god, the ox king or ox bodhisattva, addressing the Buddha, the supreme Buddhist god, and saying this, world honored one, that's an epithet of the Buddha. I've made up my mind to become a Buddha. I want to become a Buddha. I've long seen the people of the world struggling in the fields. With their 10 fingers, they claw at the mud until the blood flows. I pledge to be born in a buffalo body. Here I chose to translate Neo as buffalo. I could have translated it ox. I vow to save the people. With the 2 horns on my head, I will pull the plough, break up the earth, and turn over the soil. So, you know, it's very clear. Yes, you have here a god. He is now a bodhisattva. In order to become a Buddha, in order to achieve, you know, the highest rank of divinity, he volunteers to descend to earth. Now, you know probably what a bodhisattva is. I'm sorry to say something you probably all know. A bodhisattva in Buddhist theology is a creature, a divine creature, that postpones its own salvation for our sake. The bodhisattva decides not to enter nirvana, delays his escape from our world of suffering into nirvana for our sake. And he makes a vow. The bodhisattva makes a vow. That's the crucial moment in the career of a bodhisattva, a vow to save all living beings before he or she or it, this bodhisattva, himself or herself or itself, disappears, escapes into nirvana. And this is exactly what this god does. He makes a vow to save the Chinese peasants as their beast of burden. So if you like, this is a remarkable example of the integration of Buddhism into Chinese rural religion, the integration of Buddhism into Chinese village culture. The idea of the Bodhisattva is harnessed to express the gratitude of the peasant to his animal. Let us read, can't I do it? Okay. Let us read a little bit more. Now, this Bodhisattva has one fear. The Bodhisattva of great strength said, I only worry that because of people's accumulated evil karma, they will prize my robust flesh and skin. They will slaughter me, peel off my skin, and consume my flesh. So this Bodhisattva doesn't mind becoming of beast of burden, but he's afraid that people will eat it when he descends to earth. Now, he's not afraid about himself. He doesn't care to be eaten. He's not worried about this. What he's afraid of is for their sake, because eating a buffalo or an ox is a crime. Hence, they will be punished in hell. There's no possibility of redemption. Now, this leads me to something that I'm not sure how much you are aware of it. I wasn't aware of it. Chinese people, many Chinese people did not eat beef. Yes, there was a beef taboo in China. It's kind of surprising. People sort of are not aware of it, but it's a fact. There was a niujie, a beef taboo in China, and people, precisely because they felt so close to these draft animals, they didn't eat them. I mean, of course, there were people who ate buffaloes and oxen, but there was a religious prohibition against it. There is, by the way, a book in French by an excellent French scholar, Vincent Gossard, on this beef taboo. So this passage alludes to this beef taboo. The Bodhisattva says, I'm willing to serve as a beast of burden, but just don't eat me. Because if you eat me, you go to hell. Now, we can go over the answer of the Buddha. The Buddha answered the Bodhisattva of great sense, saying, in the past, the golden spirit, Prince Sattva, sacrificed his body to feed the tigress. This is a reference to the Buddha's own former lives. In his former life, the story goes, the Buddha was a prince, and once he ran across a starving tigress, and the tigress was mad from hunger and was about to eat its own cubs. So this Buddha in his previous life gave his own flesh to the tigress. And he was eaten by the tigress, and later he became a Buddha. So in fact, this passage compares the ox king to the Buddha. You can volunteer to become a buffalo, and you will be like me. You will become a Buddha. So in fact, it elevates the ox king or buffalo king to the level of a Buddha. Okay, I told you that I purchased most of these scriptures online, but I also obtained some in the field, doing field work. And the example I will give you is from Guizhou, in South China. I traveled to Guizhou. Well, I can tell you how it goes. The scriptures I bought online and the scriptures that Ho Chong gave me hinted of a Guizhou provenance in southwest China, in Guizhou, Sichuan, and Yunnan. There were hints in the text. Some said, gave place names in Guizhou, etc. So we went to Guizhou. I say we, that's me and my good friend Ho Chong from Shanghai Northern University. We traveled to Guizhou to search for such scriptures. And here you see us. This is in a tiny village in Guizhou province. On the right, this wonderful person is Ho Chong, Professor Ho Chong. And here you see an exhausted, jet-lagged Western scholar, that's me. And in the middle, this person here, Master Li Ronglu, is a village ritual master who as late as 2015, 5 years ago, conducted rituals for healing buffaloes and oxen. And in his house, we found scriptures that match the ritual tradition that I was familiar with from the scriptures I purchased. So he saw it on the ground. And here, let me try and see if I can play it for you. We just listen for 1 second. He sang it for us. It's so bizarre. You do field work and you know, I was tired, I was exhausted. I recorded him with my smartphone, yes, but I should have taken pictures of him singing it. But for some reason, it didn't occur to me. So I just recorded it, and not so well. But let us listen for a second. I hope you can hear. Oh, sorry. Go back. Here I am.
啊，对，开录了。就练这个哈。好啊。就练一遍了，把这个唱完。唱完那个满庭芳的一段那个调子。且走归有也，天了既有会上不愁为大有理流亡。
You heard this? Niu Wang. I can do it, yeah? Just said the Ox King. Anyway, it was a real revelation for me to hear him singing, because as a textual scholar, I'm working on text, yes? But it's a completely different experience as to hear it being sung. The musicality of the text is a revelation. I'm not a musicologist, so I can't say anything about it, but yeah, it's the difference between reading a Jewish prayer and then going to the synagogue and seeing the people singing it. It's a completely different experience, I guess, or a church and the choir, yes. Anyway, okay, let me go ahead. Yeah, okay. I will make only 2 or 3 more points before concluding. You have seen that the ox king is conceived of as a bodhisattva that is incarnated in the very draft animals that it protects. And some scriptures from Southwest China, from Sichuan province, from Southwest China, Sichuan province, Guizhou province, identify this bodhisattva as Guanyin. So therefore, in Southwest China, the ox king was rendered as a female deity, as Guanyin mounted upon an ox, upon a buffalo, because we are in Southwest China. So what you see here, you can see the ox king. In fact, it's already an ox queen. This is Guanyin as the buffalo protecting deity, and she's mounted upon a buffalo. Okay. This is from Sichuan province. I bought, by the way, such a statue in an antique store in Chengdu. And yeah, okay. Now, this idea of the ox or the buffalo as a god is, I believe, in fact, quite widespread in China. And you can find it not only in religious scriptures, but also in legends, in popular legends. And the example I have in mind is one you are probably all familiar with. And this is the legend of the herd boy and the weaving maiden, the herd boy and the weaving maiden. You probably all know this legend. It's the most famous Chinese love story. I'm sorry, I will tell you this story even though you're probably familiar with it. The legend goes that there was a poor boy, herd boy, who had nothing in the world but a buffalo or an ox, and yo. That's the only thing he had in the world. And he was so poor that he could not marry. He couldn't find a wife. He was too poor. No one wanted to marry him. One day, let us say it's a buffalo. One day, the buffalo opened its mouth and said, listen, on this and that date, in this or that place, the heavenly maidens will descend from heavens to bathe in a pond. So you should steal the clothes of one of them, and when she demands her clothes, you demand that she marries you. And this way you will obtain the wife, not just the wife, but a heavenly maiden. So our hero, the protagonist of the legend, the herd boy, did as suggested by the ox. And indeed, the heavenly maidens were there. And he stole the clothes of one of them and demanded that she marries him. And she did. And they lived happily together. And they even had 2 kids, 2 children. Yes, a handsome boy and a lovely girl. But when you marry a heavenly maiden, that's the sad end of such marriage, is one day she has to go back. She has to go back to heaven. And she was summoned back to heaven forcefully against her will. And he was left again alone with the buffalo and his 2 children. So again, the buffalo spoke. And the buffalo said, I'm going to die soon. When I die, you should peel off my skin and wrap yourself in it, and it will carry you to heaven, where you will meet your beloved. So the herd boy did as advised by the buffalo and took off to heaven. But the vicious queen mother of the West, the goddess, saw him coming, and she scratched the skies with a hairpin of hers, creating the Milky Way that forever separated the 2 lovers, the herd boy, which became a star, Altair, and the weaving maiden, which became also a star, Vega. And they are forever separated. They meet only once a year, as you all know, on the Chinese Lovers' Day, the 7th of the 7th lunar month. This is the Chinese Valentine's Day. So the legend, of course, the focus of the legend is on the herd boy and the weaving maiden. But for the purpose of today's talk, we are interested in the animal. And arguably, the animal itself is divine. He knows the when and where of the heavenly maidens bathing, so he must himself have come from heaven. And it might even be argued that he descended from heaven in the first place to help the herd boy find a wife. He sacrificed his own life so that the herd boy finds a wife. So again, this legend, like the ritual scriptures I presented to you, expresses, I believe, the gratitude of the peasant to the beast of burden, and this conception of the beast of burden as a God, a merciful God. Now, one last question. Why the buffalo or the ox? Why the buffalo or the ox were considered as gods and other draft animals no? I'm thinking of the poor donkey, which I like so much. Donkeys worked so hard, but no one said that they are gods. And people ate donkey meat in China. Whereas the buffalo, people said it was a god. And I think the answer might be related, and here I'm focusing upon the buffalo, not the ox, upon the combination of this animal's strengths and gentleness. The buffalo is, so I understand, I'm not a veterinarian myself, but the buffalo is a remarkably docile animal. It's tremendously strong, but equally docile. And across Southeast Asia, these are usually children that take care of the buffalo, as you can see in this picture. So I think that perhaps this combination of gentleness and strength led people to conceive of the buffalo as a merciful God. In fact, this image of the toddler mounted upon the tiny toddler mounted upon this huge beast was a favorite topic of Chinese art, beginning in the Song Dynasty and all the way to the present, as you see here in this masterpiece, detail of a masterpiece by Li Kera. I think I can stop here. I hope not too early. And we can talk. You can see my conclusion written here, but yeah.
No, thank you so much. And we have been accumulating some further comments and questions, and I will just work through them in order. So Anthony Fazio, going back to an earlier point, also reports that he saw farmers singing to donkeys or mules near Harbin in 1996. And Lianglua reports that her or his mother, who grew up in a southern Chinese village in the 50s and early 60s, whose family was the designated village buffalo feeder, has no knowledge of the ox/buffalo king. They will ask their grandmother, who grew up in the 30s and 40s, but they're curious about whether the knowledge and popular religious practice relevant to the Buffalo King in southern China started to decline in the late imperial period into the Republican period, or whether such knowledge and practice still has a lot to do with personal/family/local background and therefore varies widely.
Yeah, I imagine that what you are saying, you know, that in your question, you gave the answers. I imagine that, yes, perhaps it started declining in the Republican period, even though I have many scriptures from the Republican period that were copied in the Republican periods, and I have scriptures copied as late as 215. So, you know, yeah, so it's hard for me to answer, but and I imagine it also varies from locality to locality. What is interesting, yeah, and it might also be that people just didn't use the word ox king, that instead of saying ox king, they refer to it as the Xinyo Guanyin, that is Guanyin mounted on a buffalo or an ox. They used one of the other names. I just said that it was also conceived of as a bodhisattva, as a pusa. So perhaps they said Nyowang Pusa, or they said Xinyo Pusa. When I bought the statue of this god in Chengdu, so in the antique store I went to, again with friends, I always go, you know, I depend on Chinese friends. So when I go to these stores, we all ask for Xinyo, Guanyin. That's the word they use, the Guanyin mounted on buffalo, which is the same as the ox, as the buffalo king. So perhaps they use another name for the god. Yeah, but perhaps it also varies from locality to locality. And another interesting question, I'm sorry, I'll just say it in passing, is the issue of other people, other nationalities in South China, because the buffalo is tremendously important also for all the minorities who also rely on it for plowing the fields. And it appears that they too conceived of buffaloes of the buffalo as a god. There were all sorts of myths. Yeah, but I'm not an expert on it. Yeah.
No, there's a lot to explore here. Lianglua also reports that the beef taboo, that her grandmother refused to eat buffalo her entire life, beef, and the whole family who stayed in the village, I might be interpreting this a bit, also never ate beef. And her mother's, in her mother's words, "Niu han tonggan qing." So, so anyway, fascinating personal reports. Yuan Yuan Duan says that the horse king had long existed in China, but why is it that since the Ming that it was worshipped widely by the military and imperial court? And is it because of military threats from the steppe? And in part 2 of her question, considering that horses were widely exploited by the nomads, she's curious whether the Ming soldiers had an identity crisis when they worshipped the horse king. For example, did this blur the lines between themselves and the Mongols?
Okay, so thank you for this great question. I'll begin by saying that horse protecting deities existed in China as early as the 10th century BC, as early as the 10th century BC. We know this from scriptures that were discovered in tombs, pre-Han scriptures, and from archaeological finds of horse effigies and from the ancient Chinese classics, such as the Zhou Li, the rites of Zhou. So gods were summoned to protect horses as early as the Zhou. I mean, almost as early as Chinese used horses, they venerated gods that protected horses. And one of these gods was called Mazu, the horse ancestor, not Mazu that is worshipped in South China nowadays, which is a female, not the Ma of, but a horse, Mazu. So there were such gods in China. I think that the horse king, I find it beginning in the Ming because it was originally an Indian god introduced to China during the medieval period, and it was only gradually that it penetrated Chinese folk religion. So I think that that's why I find it only in the Ming. In fact, I find it from the Song dynasty. But I think that this is the slow impact of Indian mythology on Chinese religion. It's a complicated topic in itself. And I think that that's why in the Ming dynasty, this is the god. But Tang dynasty military scriptures also include worship of equine tutelary deities, just not this one. Did they have an identity crisis? I don't know. Well, you know, the horses is an issue in China because the Chinese had to buy horses from their enemies. You know this, yes? The Chinese always had problem raising horses. So they bought horses from the people north of the wall, of the Great Wall. But they needed them. So what can I say? But anyway, if you read the writings of Chinese generals, famed generals of the 16th century, such as Qi Jiguang, they always mention the horse king. Sometimes they call him not horse king, they call him horse god, Ma Shan. Yes, Shen rather than Wang. So another name, but yeah. Thank you.
No, fascinating. Sue George asks whether there were scriptures for the horse gods.
There are. I sort of made a neat picture. I said, well, the ox had scriptures, sort of differentiated. The horse, I also have horse king scriptures, but much fewer. Much fewer, really short and fewer. And my sense is this. I'm sharing with you ongoing research, yes? So I might change my opinion. But my sense is that the cult of horses, there was less interest in the animal itself. It's as if, I mean, they prayed to the horse king to protect the horses, but there wasn't this personal affinity with the animal. That's my feeling. Whereas in the case of the ox or the buffalo, you really sense this personal affinity. There is the beef taboo. Also, you know that in the case of the ox or the buffalo, we have a horse king birthday, which was a holiday, and we have an ox king birthday, which was a holiday. In the case of the ox king, the holiday meant a day off for the buffaloes and the oxen. They were given a day off. They were fed special food. Yeah, they were sort of, people washed them, and sort of, there was real attention given to the animal itself. It was really care for the animal. Whereas in the case of the horse king, there are these rituals to protect the horses, to protect the donkeys, to protect the mules, but I don't sense the same. But perhaps I'm wrong. One of you just mentioned that he also heard, or she heard, people singing the donkey. So there were also obviously personal affinity with the donkey. But somehow overall, my feeling is that the ox or the buffalo got special treatment in Chinese culture.
So
but to answer your question, the short answer is yes. There are also scriptures for the healing of horses. Yes, we do have such scriptures.
So
yeah.
I hate to interject, but I'm just a little bit suspicious of the connecting the treatment of the divinity or divinization of oxen versus horses to the nature of the animals themselves And I just want to throw out the possibility that this works its way through. The docility allows you to send them out, which my grandfather also did as a child in the prairies, in the Nebraska prairies, send them out with the oxen alone to watch and feed them, as opposed to horses and donkeys, which you would not necessarily be able to do, or even need to do necessarily in the same way. So I'm just.
No, it's wonderful. So what you mean is that it's the fact that they go and come back. That's what you mean?
It's the fact that that the relationship builds from early childhood. So yeah, I'm putting this into the lived experience of and the power of something that develops from childhood.
Yeah, and another thing that I'm really sharing you my own doubts. I've emphasized throughout the talk that Neo is both ox and buffalo. Yes, and yet my explanation was the docility of the buffalo. I stressed the buffalo, but what about the ox? Yes, I will just hint here that I know that as early as the 10th century, a Dunhuang manuscript described the ox as a Dali Usa. And it's an ox, it's not a buffalo. And it's the 10th century. So it wasn't a buffalo that they had in mind, it was an ox. So my explanation of the buffalo doesn't work there. So yeah, but thank you.
So sorry to jump in. Jinya asks, thanks you for your wonderful talk, and wonders whether there is a tie between the belief of between the Chinese zodiac and commitments to worship of the horse king and buffalo king.
There is a connection, and the connection, I can point the connection in the case of the ox. Yeah, in the case of the ox. The ox is also a constellation. There is the constellation of the ox in heaven, the ox constellation. And this constellation is governed by a god, a Taoist god called Zhenwu, the true warrior, a Taoist god. I didn't go into this because I was focusing, I was presenting the Buddhist side of things, but in fact, the ox and buffalo are sometimes described as incarnations of Zhenwu. And the reason is that you say this Taoist god, Zhenwu, and the reason is because of the zodiac, I think, because the constellation of the ox is governed by Zhenwu. So there is a connection that I can point in the case of the ox king. In the case of the horse, I don't know. Of course, it's also part of the zodiac, yeah. Yeah, but I have to think about it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Gina also points out stories in the Buddhist tradition mentioning buffalo and tying the beef taboo to the prevention of epidemic or contagious diseases. I'll just also throw out, I'm familiar with a song text that describes contagion from beef meat, oxen meat, or beef, yeah.
And this scripture, I will ask both of you. You are talking about contagious disease that impacts, or about episodic disease that impacts animals, or about disease that impact people? Those who eat beef will be punished by becoming sick.
It's not a punishment. In the text I know, it's not a scripture. It's just saying, it's talking about avoiding the fumes, the contagious fumes.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, the beef taboo, I'm answering you first, and then I will refer to the person that asked this question. The beef taboo emerged during the Song period. And so, it's not surprising that you have this text. It emerged during the Song period, and there was this feeling that people who eat beef will be punished by disease, falling ill. So, it fits well. Buddhist scriptures, I would love to see them. What you just mentioned, if you could email me the reference, I will be really grateful. I will be really grateful. Yeah, for seeing Buddhist scriptures. Yeah, that you are familiar with.
I'll make a note. Okay. Jenny Lau says, what was the ritual when the oxen eventually died?
There was a ritual, and I'm embarrassed. You're asking me such, you know what is the definition of a good question? It's a question that the speaker can't answer, doesn't know the answer. So your questions are great. There was a ritual. That is to say, there was burial. There was burial for the animal, and there were prayers for its salvation, for its reincarnation, either as a human or as a god. And again, this goes back to medieval times. In Dunhuang, we found, the Dunhuang trove of medieval texts include funerary rituals for the benefit of actually not only oxen, but also other beasts of burden. And the people who conducted these rituals made the ritual with the hope of transferring the merit to the animal, so that the animal be reborn as human or as a god in paradise. Now, what is interesting about these scriptures is that why did they do it? This is always the question. Why do we do good things? Is it because we are good, or is it because we are afraid? So, that's always the question. When you read this, I'm talking now about the medieval scriptures, it's quite clear that the people who prayed for the health of their animals were afraid that if they don't, the animal will sue them in the netherworld. The animal will sue them in front of Yama in the netherworld. So in fact, when they prayed for the animal, they were begging the animal to forgive them. Yes. So, it's asking the animal, please, don't punish, because if you mistreat your ox, you will be reborn as an ox. Yeah. So they are asking the animal to forgive them, and they say, well, I'll pray for you. You will be reborn as human.
I am so excited that the oxen got in on the juridical part of the afterlife. So,
I'm sorry to ramble, but I have a dog. Yes, I have a dog. And after reading the scriptures, I became afraid. If I mistreat my dog, it will sue me in my afterlife. That will be really sad.
There's be careful.
Yeah.
Careful. Mara Yuadu asks whether you could elaborate a little more on the gender attributes of the horse and ox king, and whether male buffalo could be regarded as an incarnation of a female deity. And
I can't say really. My simple answer is obviously yes. We are talking about male animals, male and female, but certainly also male. So the simple answer would be yes. The male ox was an incarnation of a female goddess of Guanyin. Yeah, definitely. Yes, that's the simple answer. Now the Chinese text doesn't give you they just say no. They don't specify whether it's a male that they have in mind or a female, yes? They don't use the vocabulary, they don't add female or male in the text I'm working on. Yeah, there is a Tang Dynasty text of a monk. But by the way, this whole thing of the ox in Chan literature, those of you who are familiar with Chan literature know the parable of searching for the ox. Are you familiar with this parable? It's a famous Buddhist parable that kind of searching for enlightenment is searching for the ox. It's a Buddhist parable. So the ox is really important in Zen Buddhism. It's really important. But anyway, there was at least one Zen master from the Tang Dynasty who specified that he wishes to be reborn, and he specifies, he uses as a male ox, as a male ox. This is the only thing that comes to my mind that I remember gender being mentioned Otherwise, I can only, as your question, yeah. The text don't specify if it's male or female.
Okay. Steve is here, and he invites you to speculate or elaborate a bit more on why in mythic narrative, various animal spirits, such as snakes and foxes, often manifest in human disguised form on the one hand, and why various animal deities are imagined to occupy human-like social structures as kings, soldiers, etc.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Steve Sangren has an answer. But it's a great question. You are right, because I'm saying the title of my talk is Chinese Animal Gods. Yes, but it's a misleading title. It's a misleading title. The title should be Animal Protecting Gods. Animal Protecting Gods, because when you see the icons, as you point in your question, these are human gods. These are human gods. They have human face, even though the horse king has this small horse on top. So there is a sort of a reminder of its equine function, at least. But you are right. Yeah, perhaps, yeah, because gods have to be human. At least in China, if there are bureaucrats, they must be human. If there are bureaucrats, heavenly bureaucrats. And if there are Buddhist gods, also, they are usually imagined as having human facial attributes, even if the bodies, you're right, they're imagined as humans. And it's only, you're absolutely right. The only thing is that these gods are incarnated as an ox, yeah? So the ox itself is a god, a human god, perhaps. But you are right. And on the other hand, dangerous creatures, such as vixen, yes, they are animals assuming human form. Yeah, so it's a great question. Yeah, you are pointing in the right direction.
He also notes, he suggests this changeling quality also manifests in the small images of the avatar placed on the heads of the icons.
The small image of the...
So I'm guessing the little
horse on top. Yeah, the little horse on top of the, you mean in the case of the horse? Yeah, here I guess you can see this is what you are referring to, or yeah.
I don't have direct access to Professor Sangren, but that's what I infer.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, Chen Xiaoyun, who thanks you for a fascinating talk, and wonders how may people's attachment to horse and ox differ when horses were partners of military missions and oxen were partners in rural life. And
I'm sorry, but I cut you short, or?
I think that's the gist.
Yeah, so you see, as I said, I don't have, I should find a text in which the owner of a horse, a soldier, in which you sense the sympathy or the gratitude to the animal. Somehow it comes up to mind more in Western literature, no? But there must be examples also in China, in the Chinese literary traditions, of people, going to battle with the horse, and perhaps the horse get injured, and they, and they are so sorry. But somehow I don't have, I'm sure there are examples, but in my research on these religious texts, usually, as I said, I came upon numerous instances of sympathy to the ox or the buffalo, and more what seems like a little bit more perfunctory care for the horse or the donkey or the mule, even though there should be, especially in a military context.
No,
but I don't have it. But I would love to get it.
Yeah. Yun Yun again asks, her personal experience is that ritual manuscripts were usually preserved without dates. And she's wondering how you or how we can put these in historical context.
So actually, the ritual scriptures that that I have, I don't know if I want to stop the share screen, you know, and show you some examples that I have in my computer. I think it will mess the presentation if I start looking for them. But actually, they do have dates. Some of them don't. Some don't have dates, but many do have dates. And my impression is, from my very brief fieldwork with this that I just showed you, is that the date was put when the ritual master copied the scripture, and usually he copied it on the occasion of the performance of the ritual. So, for example, he received the scripture from his teacher, and often when he copies it, he put a date, he puts on a date. In any event, the earliest scripture I have, and it's an incredibly long scripture, I'm talking thousands of Chinese characters, a scripture for the healing of oxen or buffaloes. It's from Guizhou, and the date is the Qianlong reign. I don't remember right now, but I can check. It's 18 something. It's, yeah. So I'm sorry, 17 something. It's 18th century. 18th century Qianlong reign. I have the exact date. So so yes, there are dates, and in these village rural manuscripts that I have, and most of them were given to me by, again, I cannot express my thanks to my colleagues Ho Chong from Shanghai Normal University. Just to give you an idea, I'm sorry, I'm digressing here for a minute. Ho Chong has at home a collection of, I think, 10,000 ritual scriptures on various topics from South China. Many he collected himself, and many he bought. Now just imagine what we are talking about. You know, no publisher will ever be able to publish this, to photocopy these scriptures and publish them. These are thousands upon thousands of pages. Yeah, so there is a treasure trove of rural culture, rural religion that is waiting to be studied. An enormous body of scriptures.
Meir,
Anyway.
do they preserve the dates of the previous, do they only put the last date of copying, or do they preserve the earlier dates of
No, they put the date of copying. They put the date of copying, which is a problem. Because, of course, when did this ritual tradition, I'm talking a ritual tradition from Southwest China for healing and protecting buffaloes, when did it originate? Perhaps in the Song dynasty? I don't know. The earliest scripture I have is Qianlong, but who knows? Who knows how far back it goes? It's a big riddle, yeah.
So we have time for maybe just get through the last couple of questions. Hui asks, can you speak to how the Buffalo King or Bodhisattva is given embodied expression, such as in ritual or sport, like wrestling? For instance, I believe there are zhuang, humans dressed as buffalo wrestling ceremonies and similar things in Southeast Asia.
I confess that I don't know. I don't know. I'm not familiar with this wrestling, but I would love to see it. Again, if you can trouble yourself to find my email, or if I can even do it, I don't have the chat here, I can send it to you, you know, you find my email and send me references, I would be really grateful. The only thing I can point to are the images that I showed you of Guanyin mounted upon a buffalo. Yeah, that you have a female goddess seated on a buffalo. That's the only embodied expression I can think of. And there's the animal itself. And the animal was decorated during the festival of the Ox King, even though I haven't seen it myself. I haven't attended an Ox King holiday myself. But I would love to receive pictures if you can share them with me, or, you know, whatever material you have.
So I just asked email to the chat, to the, yes, the chat. So hopefully that does the trick. But one last question, does the image of the buffalo god appear in Buddhist temples? And if so, how do they differentiate in their meanings from the ones in temples specifically to buffalo gods?
I don't know. That's the you know, I didn't go into this today, but I'm not going exactly to answer your question. I'm not going exactly to answer your question, but I hope I won't tease you too much with one bit of information that awaits to be researched. The Buddha is called in Chinese scriptures Ox King. The Buddha is called Niu Wang. This is one of the epithets of the Buddha. It's a translation of Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit, as I understand it, what they had in mind was not an animal really. What they had in mind was a very manly person. The Buddha was very manly, very virile. So they called him an ox king, or like an ox among men. But there is a connection to be explored between the ox king, the Chinese ox king as protector of bovines, and the ancient Indian tradition, or the Indian epithet of the Buddha as an ox king, and how it was translated into Chinese from Sanskrit. But I haven't written on this as yet, and I'm afraid that's a topic for a whole other talk.